One gesture, one person, one moment in time. That's a quote from author Libba Bray. Words of wisdom based on her life experience. When she was 14, Libba's dad announced to his family that he was gay. Because he was a Presbyterian minister, he remained in the closet to the rest of the world. It wouldn't be for another 25 years that the Supreme Court would strike down laws banning gay sexual activities. Weeks after her high school graduation, Libba was in a car accident. She needed 13 surgeries to reconstruct her face, including an artificial eye. Weeks after her high school graduation, she had that setback. She graduated from college. She graduated in 1988. Moved in with her friend Ed and his same-sex partner Norbert. When the landlord came by, Libba pretended to be Ed's girlfriend out of fear that Ed and Norbert could be evicted, just for being gay. Over the course of the next 2 years, Libba lost her friend Norbert and her father to HIV/AIDS. Back then, people called it a gay cancer, but Libba persevered. Her first book, A Great and Terrible Beauty, became the first of a trilogy of New York Times bestsellers. Libba's story is rooted in change, good and bad, adversity and adaptation. Her failures and struggles are just as important as her successes. Both equally help shape who she is today. I think that is true of our country as well. There are so many issues that compel me to speak out. I stand before you today to ask you to join me in my run for the White House because I believe this is the most important presidential election of our time. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us all how much the American healthcare system has failed us. When politicians say we need Medicare for all, what I hear is VA hospital for all. The Veterans Administration is among the worst in our healthcare system. In 2014, the VA falsified data to show compliance with its own deadlines, and then many died before even receiving care. This top-down monopoly is unacceptable for any person, let alone those willing to sacrifice their lives in service to our country. Let's be honest, the current American healthcare system isn't working for anyone. Well, that is, anyone other than the wealthy and the well-connected who always have access, or the billion-dollar insurance companies that bring in new record profits every year. My heart breaks for the millions of Americans who have been left behind, those who go bankrupt trying to care for their loved ones, or those with pre-existing conditions who live in constant fear of whether they'll be able to cover an unexpected hospital visit. For decades, politicians in Washington have insisted that it is the free market that has failed us, that we just need to give in and go to a government-run, one-size-fits-all program. I have some news for them. We haven't had anything even close to a free and competition-based system in nearly a century. The alternative to our current big government failure isn't even a bigger government failure. Some of the biggest issues are at the very core of the American healthcare system. The problem is that it isn't actual insurance. In any other industry, insurance only pays for unexpected costs, and because of that, costs generally remain low. Meanwhile, our broken healthcare system has insurance cover everything, and it leads to higher prices for everyone. Just think how expensive car insurance would be if it paid for gas, oil changes, or car washes. You would have no reason to shop around for those services, and all the mechanics and gas stations would increase cost without you even knowing. The car insurance companies wouldn't care because they'd be getting paid big dollars either way. This is exactly what has happened in our healthcare system. There is absolutely no incentive to look for better prices and to compete. As a result, healthcare providers have no reason to compete. Insurance companies can charge higher prices without any accountability, and all of us have to foot the bill. The best example of how a market-based healthcare system can operate is in Singapore, which reserves the use of insurance for catastrophic care. In 2014, Singapore spent less than a third per person on healthcare than what the United States spent. It's time for real change. We should begin by reforming the FDA approval and patent process for prescription medications. The FDA has completely mismanaged the COVID-19 crisis and has made it extremely difficult for anyone to get tested. At the FDA, only those companies with enough money and resources get approval, and once those companies do, they weaponize patents to keep out competitors. As your president, I will work with the FDA to remove barriers to new prescription drugs and make more drugs available over the counter. The VA system, the VA healthcare system, should be converted to a system like the one used in the state of Indiana, so that veterans are given control over their healthcare dollars so they can do with it what they wish. Our obligation to veterans should begin not just when they come back from the war, looking at their healthcare costs. There are soldiers currently deployed who weren't even born when the war on terror began. Absolutely. In that time, over 150,000 people have died in Afghanistan, including 40,000 civilians. In Iraq, 300,000 people are dead, including 200,000 civilians. In Pakistan, 23,000 civilians and 65,000 people total have been killed. The U.S. spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. Our troops are stationed in nearly 150 different countries. I'm getting there. But first we have to let the C-SPAN viewers know exactly what the problem is, because the media doesn't seem to be telling them. To continue with our problems that nobody has heard of, including not only the media, but the two major parties who are both war hawks, our government has increasingly engaged in drone warfare, even striking weddings and hospitals. The names and faces of war change, but the problems remain the same. Nation building and regime change create power vacuums and greater distrust of the United States. And we are left to deal with the same issues over and over again. In every election, candidates promise peace, but they only deliver more war. I will bring the troops home. Again, I will bring the troops home and turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. It's time for real change. Another issue we must address is the environment. We hold an obligation to future generations to end the dependence on fossil fuels. The reason we have that is the federal government gives about $15 billion annually to oil and coal companies. And this doesn't even include the billions in tax credits and cheap public land leases, which disproportionately go to these companies. This is nothing but corporate welfare, taking from the poor and giving to the wealthy. Currently, red tape prevents cleaner and more sustainable energy from entering the marketplace. The most promising is nuclear, whose carbon footprint is vastly outmatched by its efficiency. I will work with Congress to eliminate all energy subsidies and level the playing field. I will also reduce regulations that prevent competition that unfairly entrench older forms of energy. It's time for a real change. The IRS taxes Americans at every turn, and the tax system is so complicated that only those who can afford personal accountants and tax lawyers are able to navigate the code. That same IRS probes every detail of Americans' lives to decide how much they should pay. Meanwhile, the government accumulates more debt. Now, some demand increases in domestic spending, while others insist on increases in military spending. And they come to a bipartisan compromise by increasing both. This was epitomized by the $2 trillion CARES Act, which, in our country's most dire time of need, was filled with waste and gave billions of corporate handouts. As your president, I will eliminate the IRS and work with Congress towards eliminating the federal income tax altogether. When it comes to cutting spending, we cannot take any solutions off the table. I would encourage baseline budgeting. Instead of assuming an increase, we start at zero every year and decide what can be eliminated and what is absolutely necessary. It's time for real change. As we look to American history, we must accept that the experiences of some do not live up to our aspirations. When Africans were forcibly seized and brought to the United States, to the now United States, only their worst nightmares could have predicted the badges of slavery would persist half a millennium later. While millions of Americans view the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution with great pride, Black Americans are reminded that their ancestors were in shackles for another century when these founding documents were signed. The same men who promised freedom did not extend those freedoms to Black men, women, and children. Guarantees of liberty and justice for all ring hollow for Black Americans who saw slavery replaced with Black codes, Jim Crow, and now a long list of institutions and programs that are too many to name. As libertarian columnist and researcher Jonathan Blanks has stated, it is not enough to be passively not racist. We must be actively anti-racism. It's time for real change. Immigrants also see a stark contrast between our promise and their reality. Though countries of origin have changed, the American legacy of what immigration is supposed to be remains the same. Different cultures held together by inclusion and acceptance. A shining city upon a hill, welcoming the tired, poor, and huddled masses. The data are clear. Immigrants are a positive for the United States. Not only do they contribute billions to the economy, but they also commit less crime and take less in government benefits than native-born Americans. And current immigrants are assimilating at a quicker rate than ever before. Economics aside, the reasons for free and open immigration rest upon charity and morality. The United States should symbolize a helping hand to those in need and build bridges instead of walls. I will work with Congress to open the borders and provide a pathway to citizenship for the millions of undocumented persons already in the United States. I would like to see the United States welcome new citizens into our country the way my grandparents were welcomed when they immigrated here. It's time for real change. As your president, I will federally decriminalize all drugs. And allow for states, allow them the power to self-determine their plan of action of drug crimes, which would not be how it is today. We would not see all of the people who are locked up for simple possession, for simple use, with no violence and no actual crime. If there is no victim, there is no crime. I will pardon anyone convicted at the federal level of these or any other victimless crimes and leave the door wide open for the medical community to deal with substance abuse issues in ways that can salvage lives, not throw them away. This is just one step towards ending over-incarceration of people of color and letting consensual adult activities become safer and destigmatized, allowing the true victims to be recognized so they can be given the help they need. I will defund federal involvement in policing and civil asset forfeiture. And supplying of surplus military equipment and no-knock raids, and the ending qualified immunity so good citizens can take legal action against police brutality when it becomes necessary. I will also increase oversight to ensure that the law applies to its enforcers just as much to its communities. It's time for real change. As your president, I will eliminate the Department of Education and give more choice to students, teachers, and parents, particularly in impoverished areas. We have a large and beautiful country, and people in different parts of the country have different needs and should have control over their educational system. We must end this one-size-fits-all system that the federal government has forced upon us. It's time for real change. In this time of uncertainty, Americans don't need or want someone to rule over them. I've had many roles throughout my career, but none has been more rewarding than being on the campaign trail, speaking to people who are simply tired of the failures in Washington. The policies I've outlined today aren't about theories. They're about the middle-class worker who has to decide whether to buy medicine or pay rent. They're about the soldier deployed to a foreign land for no good reason and the people living there who feel like their country is being occupied. They're about the millennial who fears that the damage done to the environment can never be undone. They're about the immigrant who only desires to make a better life for her family without persecution. They're about the person of color who just wants to drive home without fear of being pulled over and killed. They're about the blue-collar worker who watches his hard-earned tax dollars get sent to multi-billion-dollar corporations. It doesn't have to be like this, and we don't have to tolerate it. It's time for a new way, a path that recognizes what should have been clear from the beginning. Just like Libertarian persisted despite obstacles, injustice, and misfortune, let's learn from our failures. Let's build upon our successes and create change that lasts. Get ready, Libertarians, because we have work to do. Get ready to talk about this campaign and help those unaware of our platform understand what it means to be all in for liberty. Get ready to get on the phones and keyboards, to knock on doors whenever and wherever you can, to let people know that there is a better option. The old parties have tried to keep us down, but not this time. We are on our way to the White House, and when we get there, we will give it back to the 330 million Americans it really belongs to. It's time for change. Thank you.